Hola, hola everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hola, hola. ¿Me escuchan? If you can hear me, clap once. Excellent, awesome. Bueno, hello everyone. My name is Miria Ponte Vargas. I am a HIP board member, terming out, and also the founder of Civil Strategies, a marketing and public relations firm and operations firm. So I'm very pleased to be here and to moderate the Authors Corner, which I heard last year was a big hit, and we know it's going to be a big hit again. So I am honored and excited to have a fantastic lineup of authors who will give us all a short TED Talk style discourse. You may have seen them in the program book. I'm going to go ahead and name them, and then I'm going to introduce each of them as well. Individually, we have Oscar Peria Abello, JC Cervantes, thank you, Mike de la Rocha, Mike Madrid, Alicia Fernandez Miranda, perdón. But let's go ahead and give them a hand of applause. I also wanted to know two very special guest authors as well who are near and dear to HIP and to NAP, and who will be joining us after this session at the book signing outside. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jesse Leon. And also not present in the room, but in our hearts, she was a speaker this morning, Paola Ramos. So I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. We'll go right into the book talks. And our first speaker is speaker and author, Oscar Perry Abello. He's a New York City-based journalist covering responses to economic injustice in cities. He's a currently senior economic justice correspondent for Next City, an independent, not-for-profit online publication covering cities from the lens of social, racial, and environmental justice. His writing has also appeared in Yes Magazine, City and State New York, Impact Alpha, Shelter Force, and other outlets. He's here to talk to us about The Banks We Deserve, Reclaiming Community Banking for a Just Economy. My ears are all up on that one. An historically rooted yet fresh take on the argument that community banking has a crucial role to play in addressing urgent social challenges, from creating a more racially just economy to preparing for a changing climate. So, hand of applause for Oscar, and your turn.
All right, thank you to HIP and NAP and everyone to make this event possible. Really happy to be here with you from New York City. Again, my name is Oscar Pereyabello. He, him, his pronouns, Sagittarius Sun, Gemini Moon, Cancer Rising, if you're interested. I do live in Washington Heights with my partner and our two most photogenic kitties in the world. And you can check Instagram on that. Okay, so I have now less than 9 minutes, so I'm just going to rush through this, all right? The oldest human writing found, 5,000 years old, on the fields of Mesopotamia, so modern-day Iraq. We're talking about ancient Sumerian civilization, the earliest human writing found so far. These were not love poems, these were not letters, these were loan contracts and accounting ledgers, receipts of payments. These were documents, the first oldest written records found. These are documents recording financial transactions between local banks, because back then in ancient Sumeria, every little temple across the landscape was also a local bank. And at some point, we're not quite sure when, people started lending to each other. And you just think about it too, like if we invented writing to keep track of these transactions, how long do we don't even know, right? But how long do you think we were doing this before we invented writing, right? Okay, that's 5,000 years ago. Fast forward to medieval China, 600 to 900 AD, the Tang Dynasty. This is the golden age of Chinese arts and culture. If you go to the Met, you go to the Chinese arts and culture section, like half the stuff is from the Tang Dynasty. Huge artworks, sculptures, tablets, all kinds of stuff. In the Tang Dynasty, every little Buddhist monastery across the Chinese landscape was also, thousands of Buddhist monasteries, all of them were also local banks. They called them inexhaustible treasuries. Human beings have been using local banking for as long as we have written records to build flourishing, thriving societies. We've always been doing this, and this country is no exception for that, right? So, again, we have 6 minutes left. In the early days of this country, you had to go directly to the state legislature to get a bank charter, all right? So from 1821 to 1835, 563 petitioners from 111 towns in New York State went to the New York State legislature to ask for a bank charter. 563 petitioners from 111 cities and towns across the state. 45 of those petitioners from 40 towns got a bank charter. Not a lot, but 40, okay? Or 45 petitioners from 40 towns. All across the state, not just New York State, not just New York City, but upstate, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, all over, all right? So that's from 1821 to 1835. 111 towns wanted a bank, 40 towns got a bank. And economists have done the research and looked at the comparisons, all the fair scientific data to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. The 40 towns that got a bank, by 1870, they were twice as large as the towns that applied for a bank but didn't get a bank. Like, banks, local banks, or how we built this country. New York is not an exception, by the way. I mean, every state has a similar story of like the local banks going out there and funding and financing the housing, the businesses, the farms, all of the work, the main streets that we all know and love. So many of us know and love today. Now, of course, let me acknowledge that this was all built on stolen lands, and a lot of it was cultivated using stolen labor. But let's not lose the lesson of local banking does big things. How big? Even today. Today we've got 4,000 local banks left across the country. There are 11% of the banking sector. They've got $151 billion in construction loans on their books. The big banks, the big four banks, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Chase. The big four banks, they're 40% of the banking sector. They've got $54 billion in construction loans on their books. So the community banks we have today are still building 3 times as much as the 4 big banks that dominate the market. That's today. Commercial real estate, similar story. The big 4 banks have about $200 billion in commercial real estate loans in their books. Community banks, 4,000 community banks, $590 billion in commercial real estate loans on their books. Small businesses, we all love small businesses. The big 4 banks, $100 billion in small business loans on their books. Community banks, $220 billion in small business loans on their books. Community banks are still doing more of the work that we all want and need. We need to build more housing. We need to build more renewable energy. We need to build things. And my book is an argument that says, rather than trying to beg the big banks to do more, let's have more little banks doing more. They're already doing it. Why don't we have more of them? And also, why aren't they in the communities that look like us? Because out of those 4,000 community banks right now, only 120 of those community banks are owned or led by communities of color. So 3% of community banks are led by communities of color. That number is astounding to me, and I think it needs to change, right? It needs to be higher, much higher. And that's what the book is about. And I got 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes. So there's some hope in the book, right? So the book doesn't just talk about the history. That starts with the history because I'm a journalist, and you got to know the context. You got to know the history. You got to know that if you're going to go out there and start a little credit union or a little bank, because they do talk about credit unions in the book too. If you're going to do one of these things, it feels small, and it will feel lonely. But the book, I want you to have the book so that you know that even though it feels small, it's huge. And there used to be many more of these community banks, right? If we have 4,000 community banks today, 40 years ago in 1985, the year I was born, we had 15,700 community banks. Community banks were 40% of the banking sector. We used to have a much more locally owned, locally controlled banking sector. We had that. Again, not all perfect. These were the banks that redlined. These were the banks that funded a lot of suburban sprawl. But those were rules. Like, we told the banks, don't invest in these neighborhoods. We told the banks, fund single-family housing and highways and all the infrastructure that we know is sprawl today. I got 1 minute and 45 seconds left. So, in the book, I have established community banks and credit unions that kind of show this is what you can do. Like, once you're established and you're there, you can make those community-based, relationship-based, character-based loans. They can come, you can do that work. And it can be funded by deposits, which are the cheapest source of capital out there. Cheaper than PRIs, cheaper than even government financing. Deposits are the cheapest source of financing out there. It's why the big banks want to buy up all the little banks and take all of that. I got 1 minute left. So these stories in this book show the established banks and also a few of the newer banks and newer credit unions that I've covered in my work at Next City over the past 10 years. So there's enough of these new banks like Adelphi Bank in Columbus, Ohio, first new Black-led bank in 20 years, and also Arise Community Credit Union in Minneapolis, Minnesota. First new credit union in Minnesota in about 10 years. It will open its doors for business Juneteenth, Thursday, tomorrow. And that's my time. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments, Oscar. I have all sorts of follow-up questions, but I've been told I can't ask any questions because we're tight on time. So if you do have follow-up questions or comments for Oscar, I hear you're all going to be outside with your books, signing as well. So we'll make sure that you can ask him anything that you'd like during that period. I'm also going to make sure that we all recognize Paola Ramos, who has made it in the room, just to say. Whoop, whoop. All right, excellent. So our next speaker, author, is JC Cervantes, who is a New York Times best-selling author of The Storm Runner. Who's read JC's books? Has her on Audible. All right, if not, we're gonna have to get on that. The Storm Runner was called a rip-roaring adventure in a starred review. Her first novel, Tortilla Sun, was a 2010 New Voices pick by the American Bestsellers Association and was named Bank Street's 2011 Best Book list. Hand of applause for that. She grew up in San Diego and was fascinated by stories about Maya gods and magic. She's here to tell us about her latest novel, The Anatomy of Magic. It's about a young woman who learns to embrace all the messy imperfections of life and love with some of her help from her magical family. And so, Jessie, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you to Hip and Nap for having me. It's always it's exciting for me because I only had to drive down I-25 from Santa Fe, and often I have to travel far, so this was a real treat. One of the questions that I get asked the most as a writer is, where do I find my inspiration? So I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about inspiration, and then I'm definitely going to talk to you about a little bit about this book and my body of work. But I wanted to start off with, every writing journey is completely different. And people always want advice, and they want blanket advice, and they want this formula, and I can't give it to them. It would be like someone coming up to you and asking you how you navigated your life and expecting that they're going to do the exact same thing. And so you might have someone who maybe they self-publish, maybe they publish at the boutique publisher, maybe they are with a big traditional 5 publisher. It doesn't matter what the result is or where they end up. At the end of the day, the writing is what has to come first. And are there any writers here that are willing to raise their hand? Because guess what? I promise you there's going to be a huge percentage afterward who will say, I didn't want to raise my hand because I'm not published. I'm like, you're still a writer. Writing requires quiet. It requires stillness. And that's a really hard thing to come by in a world that is noisy and that prizes productivity and that tells you your self-worth is only tied to how much money you make, or, did you have the family? Did you do everything according to societal expectations? Yesterday, I was a guest on a podcast, and I was really thrilled to do this podcast because a lot of times I do book podcasts most of the time. And this one is all about inspiration. That's all. I mean, every week they have someone talking about inspiration. And they wanted to focus on intuition and how I utilize intuition in my own writing. And I discussed how, I grew up in San Diego near the Tijuana border. I grew up in a house and in a culture that really valued spirit and valued Mother Earth and valued nature and valued the everyday magic that happens in our lives. And so for me, it wasn't a really far reach to get in touch with kind of like that deep resonant place that we all have, but that the noisy world is constantly trying to beat out of us. But I wouldn't have become a writer if I didn't know how to listen to my intuition. And so many years ago, I don't even know how many now, I guess about 2008, I just out of, I guess we can call it synchronicity, luck, blessing, whatever you want to call it. I had to go to Santa Fe. I wasn't living there at the time. And my husband and I have 3 daughters. And it was an opportunity for us to be up there for a couple of months. And he said, well, why don't you bring the kids up? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to take them out of school. It seems like a really, a big upheaval. One thing led to another. I ended up doing it. We rent a little Airbnb. The kids are at school one day. My youngest daughter says to me, Mom, will you write me a story while I'm at school? So I come from an oral storytelling tradition. I've always been a storyteller, but I don't remember actually write. I'm sure I had to have in school, but I don't remember ever writing a story. And so I told her that I would. And because I didn't have the noisy world and I didn't have friends knocking on my door and I didn't have all of the daily chores, I was able to really access that stillness in a way that let me sit down, and I started writing. And I kid you not, and I know this sounds like it's absolute hyperbole, there was a spark. It was like the heavens opened up and the angels sang. I remember writing and thinking, why haven't I been doing this my entire life? It was like the spark I'd been looking for so long. And so that story ended up becoming my very first book, Tortilla Sun. And then came 7 years of rejection. And that was painful and it was hard. But again, my intuition carried me through because it was all these close calls and it was, well, almost. And I wanted to give up so badly, but I knew that I had all these stories that I wanted to tell. And so I could feel deep inside of me in that place that I couldn't give up, that I had to keep going. And I'm so glad I did, because I've now written, I think, 14 or 15 books. I don't know how many are on the shelves, maybe 10 or 11. And these are stories about Latinos. They're stories that celebrate joy. They're stories that celebrate success and wealth and the pitfalls of life and all the grief that we all go through as human beings, but through a Latino lens, because it's obviously such a beautiful culture and there's so much to write about, right? There's so much to talk about. And one of the things that can be challenging is publishers will say, well, can you go do this one thing and can you speak for the Mexicans? And I say, no, because we contain multitudes. How can I possibly, I grew up in Southern California, like I said, near the Tijuana border. I ate certain foods, we had certain traditions. I have a friend who grew up near the border down in Southern Texas. He has a completely different food, completely different access to his culture, right? And so I think that can be one of the challenges as well. But it's something that I'm really committed to. So of those 14 books, none of which would have come to fruition if I hadn't paid attention to that gut knowing. And so each of them has always come to me in a vision and with a question. And, every writer has an Achilles heel. I really struggle with how to get my character from the kitchen to the living room. I struggle with battle scenes. I really struggle with love scenes. But I don't struggle with ideas. And so I will be at the grocery store, I'll be out and all of a sudden I will literally get this image in my head. And so this particular book, Anatomy of Magic, is my second adult book, and it's a companion novel to The Enchanted Hacienda. And so my first image was these rolling hills at the golden hour. I knew it was Mexico. And there were all of these beautiful, just a sea of colors of all of these flowers, and they were wafting in the wind. And my first question was, who lives there, right? I want to live there. Who lives there? I knew there was magic in the flowers and enchantment in the soil. Who cultivates the magic? And so each question led to another answer and another answer and another answer. And before I know it, typically the process is I start writing, and if I think there's something there, then it becomes a book. But this particular book, it's about the divine feminine. It's about a group of women who live on this family farm in Mexico, and they have been named by Mayahuel, the Aztec goddess, and they have agreed as a promise many hundreds of years ago, starting with the great-great-great-great-grandmother, that they would honor beauty and love always. And in return, they were going to be given a very specific magical ability. And so each of them is named after a flower, and they have very specific abilities with magic, and whether it's memory magic, dream magic, ghost magic, whatever it is. And so I had an absolutely wonderful time writing the book. But when I got the vision, I thought, I can't write an adult book. I've never written an adult book. I've written kids books. I've written young adult books. Please, 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 universe, do not ask me to do this. It's too hard. I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm glad that I listened and that I followed my intuition and did so. I'll end with, this is one of my favorite quotes by Elizabeth Gilbert of Big Magic. And she says, "The universe plants gems within each one of us and then stands back to see if we can find them." And I think that applies to more than story. I think that applies to our lives as well. So thank you so much for listening.
Wow. JC, have these been produced visually, or are we expecting a Coco type movie? Yes, sir. Okay, we're gonna. You painted such a beautiful picture, so I can't wait to actually also see it, not just in my imagination, but on screen. So let's put it out there for Jesse. Thank you so much. Okay, Mike De La Rocha is a visionary strategist, acclaimed artist, and compelling voice of change. Celebrated as one of the most influential change makers of our era. Wow. Mike has been behind several of the largest policy victories and cultural shifts in the United States history. He's earned accolades as one of Good Magazine's top 100 people reshaping our world recipient, and is a recipient of AFL-CIO's prestigious Justice. It's just so long and so much. I want to make sure I do it justice. Peace and he is a proud alumnus of UCLA, and he co-founded Revolve Impact, one of the leading creative agencies in the world. He's here to talk to us, I know, Jesse, about sacred lessons, He's here to talk to us about sacred lessons, teaching my father how to love. I'm gonna end There's a lot more, but I'm gonna end it there.
A lot of pressure. It's fitting that I come after the anatomy of magic. So if I've been taught in my tradition that we ask elders for permission if we're gonna get into sacred space. So I see Hector, so I want us to practice magic if that's okay. If you all can just put your feet down, and I'm probably doing this because I'm nervous as much as anyone else, but close your eyes. We're going to take 3 deep breaths. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. Release. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. Release. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. Release. Now I want you to keep your eyes closed. And when we talk about magic or spirit or Ifa or whatever you believe in, we have a tradition that believes our ancestors are always with us. And so I would like you in your mind's eye to think of a man in your life, whether it's your father, a partner, a brother, a friend, and I would just want you to invite them into this conversation right now. And when you have them, whether or not they are alive or deceased, I want you to open your eyes. This is magic in practice, so I wanted to just center that. My name is Mike De La Rocha. I was born in Oxnard, California, along with Carmen Perez. It's a farm working town in Southern California. I'm the proud son of 2 teachers. My dad immigrated from Chihuahua, Mexico when he was 7 years old to Boyle Heights. And my mother still, to this day, teaches for Head Start, a fairly funded bilingual education program. So I was equipped with knowledge from a very early age. I grew up in Ventura, down the street from Oxnard. And in the 80s, there weren't a lot of brown or black folks there. There was a few of us, and I went to all these schools. My mother probably is in church right now because as a Chicana, she loves Jesus. And so she worked 3 jobs for me to go to private Catholic school. And I say that because when I went to my first Catholic school as a young preschooler, there was a parent-teacher conference where the teacher said, hey, Ishmael and Gloria, you're going to have to stop speaking Spanish to your son. I didn't know English till I went to school, but they would catch me and find me crying by myself because all the kids would call me E.T. because at the time there was a Steven Spielberg movie about an extraterrestrial alien. That was the moment that changed my life because the only time I could speak, not really my native tongue, but my first language was when I went to Boyle Heights to my grandparents. Fast forward, I'm growing up, the things that say in my life, probably in this order, was punk music, skateboarding, and surfing, because in those subgroups, I found misfits like me and folks that were pushed out. It was then I went to UCLA, and UCLA gave me the framework. I met a mentor, his name is Tim Nubaini, a Black South African man who started the Black Consciousness Movement with Stephen Biko, and he taught me about the importance of connection and social consciousness. And I did that and made a lot of incredible friends that till this day are still organizing and are a big reason why LA is not going to succumb to an emperor, a wannabe fascist, but are going to survive. But growing up, I was trying to think of how did I learn how to be a man, like a real man? And it was really 2 people. My mom never knew her dad, so I only had one abuelo. And I learned how to be a man from my father and my abuelo. And it was basically they provided, they protected, but their worth was judged by how much they were producing. My grandfather was a bracero farm worker who actually went to Oxnard where I was born. And I got to see like that's how it was. But then something happened August 3rd of 2015, almost exactly 10 years ago. I went with my father, he was going in for a back surgery. It was his 3rd back surgery in about a year and a half. And, it wasn't cancer, it wasn't anything like that, it was a back surgery. And I went in there, and a couple days later, my dad unexpectedly passed away. And a part of my soul was ripped out because my dad was very instrumental, not just in the Chicano movement, but for me and my brother. In that moment, I was crushed, and I was trying to figure out, why did my dad die so early? And then I started thinking about it. My father loved me and my brother more than life itself, but I can count on one hand how many times he said, "Mijo, te amo." And it's because my grandfather, my abuelo, never told him once, "I love you." My father and the men in my life, we didn't have the vocabulary. We didn't have the ways to express ourselves. And the truth is, at least in my household, the only time that I'm able to be fully present and fully emotionally expressive is when I'm wasted and drunk with my cousins. Then all of a sudden I'm hugging them. "I love you, primo. I love you more." And that shows that innate wantingness of love and connection always exists. With my dad, the only time I got to see him totally free, honestly, was with his grandkids. Because it was socially acceptable for a grandfather to be affectionate and kiss the grandchildren and hug the grandchildren. And it was those moments me and my brother would be like, "Man, I'm 30 years old at the time. I want that still." But it wasn't accepted. Right now, there's a massive crisis in masculinity and manhood. and we're losing too many men. The statistics are 50% of Latino men have never received mental health treatment. 40% of all men, regardless of race, have never talked to anyone about their pain, never talked to anyone about their trauma, don't even know where to begin. The rates of suicide, loneliness for men are astronomical. And what it is just, it's us. For me, it's my own hurt little boy from that sandbox trying to ask for help and not knowing the language to ask for help. And on the flip side, though, I live in Los Angeles. I've had the absolute privilege and honor every other Thursday. I co-facilitate a men's circle for men who lost their homes in the Altadena fire. It's men of all ages, all racial backgrounds, all identities. And the common denominator is all of us want to be held, loved, and healed. And so the statistics and what we're seeing isn't the full story. The full story is like most of the men that I know in here, that are, those of us that are parents, I know us, we're holding our kids longer. We're telling them. I tell my son every day, besito grande. He knows what that means. Come give me a kiss. Because I want him to know and feel the love that I feel in the spirit world, but I never got to feel from my own father. And in this political moment in time, we are canceling rather than calling in. And I don't have that much time up here to speak, but I'm going to share one story that happened literally 2 days ago. The Uber driver picked me up from my hotel and brought me here. And he goes, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Los Angeles." And he goes, "Oh, it's up in flames, right?" I said, "No, it's 2 blocks out of over 500 miles, 20 million people. It's the military and the police occupation that's causing the violence." They want you to believe that it's on fire because they want to have a different narrative than what is the truth. Then he says, 3rd generation Chicano from New Mexico. He says, "I'm cool as long as they're here legally." Then I say, we can both agree that the system is broken, but you gotta agree with me that it's evil to hunt brown people, to kidnap brown people, to take brown people away from their place of worship, from their homes, from their work. You have to believe that, right? He says, "I don't want to talk about it anymore." I said, "Help me understand. I don't want to talk about it anymore." I said, "Fine, so let's talk about my book." "What's your book?" "Sacred Lessons Teaching My Father How to Love." We talked for 5 minutes, had sacred space. He bought my book on Amazon and showed me. And my point is we have to call in those men that we had in our mind's eye, because each one of us wants that same love. And if we don't, someone else is, and we all know who that is. So I just thank you for being here. Ashe to everyone's ancestors, and it's a blessing to be here.
Excellent. How many of you have Audible on your phones? Audible? Awesome. I'm always on Audible and Amazon as well. So I know that each of you are going to be out back, and I know that HIP has already purchased books so that you can sign. But you know what I'm also going to do? I'm going to encourage you to Hay que apoyar. So download on Audible, buy an extra copy on Amazon. Jesse's going to be here as well. We have an opportunity to purchase it in the flesh from him. So, hay que apoyar. Thank you for that story, Mike. Okay, no, we have now Mike Madrid, another Mike, is an American political strategist, campaign manager, and political commentator. He was press secretary for former Republican leader of the California Assembly, Rod Pacheco, as well as the political director for the California Republican Party. He's an expert on the political and voting behaviors of the Latino population. His research has pioneered political communication strategies geared towards Latino communities throughout the U.S. He was provided commentary to various publications with regards to changing trends in the Latino vote. Mike was a fellow of the UNRO Institute of Politics, at the University of Southern California. He's here to discuss his book, The Latino Century: How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. Round of applause for Mike.
Thank you. Not too sure who planned to put the Republican after Mike's talk, but I think this was very touching and moving to hear the passion, the eloquence of what he was talking about, in large part because, as another Mike who grew up in Ventura County in the same time period, I grew up on the other side of the grade. I grew up in a little city called Moore Park. Yeah, right there. Sister, wow. Morfas, yeah. And there's a funny thing about Moore Park. Moore Park was a small agricultural community when my family moved there in 1971. It was a town of about 2,500 people. By the time I graduated in 1989, it was a town of about 40,000 people. It was the fastest growing city in California through the late 70s and the 1980s. My mother was a court interpreter in Ventura. Drive across the grade every day, supported our family. My father had a lot of trouble keeping employment. But Moore Park also had another really fascinating distinction. It was the only city in California that had a declining Latino population. So all of the intimacy that we have as our families were in our homes, in our suburban homes. My town around me was growing wealthier and whiter around us. And outside of that city, California was becoming more and more Mexicano, more and more Latino. And so there are only a handful of people who have had the experience of navigating and negotiating and relating to each of those intimacies every day, the complications of what that meant as a means of survival. And what it taught me was that the superpower of our community is that we are a blended people, that we are a mestizo people. And that blended understanding makes us uniquely situated to deal with the transformative pluralism that is happening in this country and in this society today. That is what is going to be, I believe, not only the strength of our community as we emerge out of this dark, dark time, but also the strength of this country as it emerges into a new being, a new understanding. Because we all know that in the next 15 years, this country will be a non-white majority country for the first time in her 250-year history, led almost entirely by the growth of our Latino population. The purpose of my book, and the reason why I wrote my book, was because what was not mentioned in the introduction was in the year 2020, I and 7 other Republican consultants co-founded a group called the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project is the only Latino in the Lincoln Project, but there aren't a lot of Latinos in the Republican Party, or at least weren't at the time. From the moment that Donald Trump came down, that golden escalator in Trump Tower, I was one of his most public vocal critics. Cost me my business, cost me a lot of family and personal relationships, and it came at more death threats than I can count, to not only me, but to my children who have been visited over the course of the past 2.5 years and continue to do so. And I don't regret it for a moment. But what happened during that race in 2020 was very eye-opening for me. Demographically, we were seeing Latinos change. Everybody is keenly aware at this moment about this rightward shift everybody's talking about in 2024. Folks, it didn't start in 2024. It didn't start in 2020. It's been happening for the better part of a decade. Actually, most of it began, at least the seeds of this demographic change started before Donald Trump. And until we understand that, we cannot come to understand where our community, in large part, is heading. I raised the alarm bells as a member of the Lincoln Project. The Latino guy was also the data guy, the voter targeting guy. And what I found was I could move about 4 to 5% of Republicans off, that was it, off of Donald Trump and for Joe Biden. But the Democrats were losing Latinos at such a rate that it was threatening the whole race. And the Democratic consulting industrial complex was denying that it was happening. And of course it happened. Does everybody remember the margin that Joe Biden was supposed to win by and what he actually won by? That was the Latino vote in Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia. That's what happened. And after losing my political party, proudly, and not being listened to or trusted by the Democratic Party, I decided I'd write a book. And my book was not a prediction, though virtually everything I said was likely to happen happened. It was a warning. It was a warning to us as a community, to the Latino political infrastructure that has been built for 30 years, to the media, to the pundits, to anybody that would listen, to say, if you do not heed the demography, there is a very good chance that Donald Trump will win the popular vote, and he will do it with a historically high level of Latino support. Now, to their credit, a week after the book came out, the White House called. And I offered my services free of charge. I will do whatever it takes to help stop what is likely to come from coming. But the die had been cast. The infrastructure had been calcified. The adjustments were made somewhat cosmetically. And after 10, 15 years of moving in a direction, diametrically different direction than where our community was heading, exactly what I had warned about happening happened. And that leaves all of us in a critical moment as leaders in our community, as the leaders of philanthropy, as the artists who set the narrative and tell our stories, as the political consultants, as the elected officials, who are standing on the precipice of a new generation of who Latinos are becoming, who we are changing, while also trying desperately to hold on to the stories of our past that make us unique and make us uniquely positioned to guide this country and our people into this crazy, chaotic, new maelstrom of whatever the hell is happening right now. The book ultimately, though the warning signs were raised, the red flags were out there, is an optimistic look at America. For all of the problems that we have as a country, and they are many, artificial intelligence, the climate crisis that is upon us, the siloed communication strategies, the hyper-partisanship. If you were a scientist in a lab and had to come up with one solution to fix what ails the American experiment, I have no doubt in my mind that what you would create is the emergence of a new people with a blended cultural reality and understanding that could be the glue that could tie all of the constituencies together that will make America what it was supposed to be in the first place. If only we can hold on to who we are and guide that into the future of who we have always said we were. That is this moment. That's why I titled it The Latino Century. Because we, our community, if we are willing to listen to what our community is saying and acknowledge it and fight for it, this promises to be the Latino century. This promises to be where we emerge, to not just look at and cast off the yoke of what we have been living under for 250 years, but to lead and guide this country and this world to a better place. That's the book. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Mike. I did not know that you were part of the founders for Latino, ¿cómo se llama? The Lincoln Project. Wow. Amazing remarks. Thank you so much. Okay, last but not least, our last author, speaker, Alicia Fernandez Miranda. She is an award-winning Cuban-American author, speaker, podcaster, ex-CEO, and mom. Her book, My What If Year, which was shared with us last year, was featured in Marie Claire magazine and was chosen as Best New Book by People magazine and the Boston Globe. Hand of applause for that. She's also appeared on Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and a bunch of other stations and broadcast. So great for that. Hand of applause for that. And we have two special connections with Alicia. She's actually, this is her second time at the Author's Corner. And this time, we've secured advanced copies of her next novel, which she's sharing with us today. So it's called Someone's Gotta Give. So you'll all receive it ahead of the publishing date. So we will have a very special time with her, and I'm gonna just hand it over to you, Alicia. Perdón.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, I'm so glad we got those tote bags because I have now 4 new books to bring home, maybe six over there. And I'm just so honored to be on this stage with you. Thank you all so much. So would you like to travel with me to London, actually? And let's just leave all of this behind to the world of fiction. Because I'm so excited to tell you about my debut novel, Someone's Gotta Give. My main character, her name is Lucia Gutierrez, and she is in London and she's feeling lost. Lucia has spent her life as a purpose-driven fundraiser, and after a whirlwind romance, she finds herself very, very far from her Venezuelan American roots as a new mom, a new wife, and a new expat living in London. She loves her British husband and her toddler, but she is crumbling under the pressure of new motherhood and being a stranger in a very strange land where she doesn't even know which way to look when she crosses the street. And when she gets a job as a philanthropy advisor in one of London's poshest fictional private banks, I did work in a bank, but this book is not about me, I promise. She's so happy to be working back in the social impact space, this time telling donors how to spend their money instead of asking for it. But she soon finds out that meaning well and doing good are not always the same thing. So I wanted to read for you guys because nobody has read this book yet because it's not out until August. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to do a little reading for you. And this is a scene that takes place at the very beginning of Lucia's job. She gets invited to represent her bank at their annual philanthropy day. It's taking place in Buckingham Palace. So she's mingling with celebrities and royals under a gold-encrusted ceiling and pictures of Queen Victoria. So I'm going to put my glasses on because I'm old now. Okay. I might do a British accent if you're lucky at the end. Introductions were quickly made, although Lucia already knew Brody Cutler by reputation. He was the definition of a tech wunderkind, enrolling at Stanford at 15, only to drop out 2 years later and sell his music pirating app for a large fortune. He was dressed like he was trying to cosplay an elder statesman. Tweed coat with leather elbow patches, Steve Jobsian black turtleneck, and a wisp of an oiled-up goatee that looked like it had taken significant effort to grow. "I've never done philanthropy per se," he said, raising his fingers into air quotes, "but I'm very into social and environmental justice and all their related causes and forms." "That's excellent," Lucia said, sipping her water while she considered how else to respond. She thought back to an interview with him that she had read in Forbes, a notorious one where he went on and on about the need to reduce carbon emissions given aboard his private jet, the small one, not the big one. "Congratulations, by the way," she said. "I hear you're getting married." "Yes, indeed, thank you. I'm not a fan of the institution per se, but it's important to my fiancé's family, so down the aisle we'll walk. I've just come up from my bachelor party last week in Turks and Caicos." "I bet that was wild," Lucia said. "Actually, no," Brody deadpanned. "I'm passionately committed to ending the exploitation of women. So instead of the traditional entertainment, I hosted a panel discussion with exotic dancers discussing their career paths. It was highly disruptive." Lucia, who had trained herself to paste a placid smile on her face when she heard her donors spout all sorts of nonsense, nearly spit out her water. "That does sound disruptive," she said, taking another sip to stifle her laughter. "So what brings you to Philanthropy Day since you're not into philanthropy?" She mirrored his air quotes back at him. "I'm here to find ideas, disruptive ones. That's what the world needs." He went on without really making eye contact with her. "More tech people solving these problems." Personally, Lucia believed that was probably the last thing the world needed, but nothing more than a mutter of assent seemed to be required. "Most nonprofits are bloated and wasteful," he went on. "Their CEOs get paid huge salaries, and they all use their donations to pad their fat wallets." Lucia pinched the inside of her wrist. She had heard this baseless misconception more than once in her career, and it always drove her batty. Brody's base salary for a day would have been enough to keep an organization like Arte Austin afloat for a month. Who did they think was going to run the programs if no one got paid? "I want to fund something that has never been done before and is going to fix everything." Wow, that would be before she could say more, they were interrupted by the entrance of a tuxedo-clad man. Ladies and gentlemen, the princess will be arriving shortly. Please make your way to the designated tables for the greeting. Disruptive, Lucia finished. That's the end of my little bit. Yeah, I've been in the UK for 17 years and I still can't do a British accent. So it is very important, according to my legal team, that I tell you this is a work of fiction. Although I too am Latina, I too moved to London. I did work for a period of time in a private bank. And there's a lot of this book. I imagine maybe some of you have experienced conversations like that at different points in your career. And I certainly have. Alongside my husband, we founded IG Advisors. We are a London-based strategy consulting firm in the social good space. And over the last 2 decades, I've been a philanthropy advisor. I've been an in-house CSR professional, I've been a nonprofit board member, and I've been a fundraiser. I've advised members of the royal family, as well as Hollywood celebrities at the UN and some of the world's largest companies and foundations on how to create the most impact with their giving. But I promise you, this book is not a memoir. If you want to read my memoir, you can. It's out now. It's called My What If Year, and I was very glad to talk about it last year here. But this isn't a memoir, and I was so excited to write about the world of philanthropy in fiction. It was freeing. And it was delightful because in my life as a philanthropy advisor, my words have to be thoughtful. They are carefully chosen, and my criticism is always measured. I am a call people in person as well, not a call out person. I like to create a big tent. I think we have to take donors on a journey with us. And sometimes that means thinking about where and when I need to work with people to get the outcome that I want. But in fiction, I can do whatever I want. I didn't have to give Lucia any real situations, and there were no real-world consequences for her and no risk. I wanted to share a personal story from my consulting life. In my early 20s, I was working with a large pharmaceutical company. They were setting up their corporate foundation, and we were hired to do their strategy. And we spent 6 months researching the needs of their communities, their employees. We put together this incredible program that was going to support immigrant women with healthcare access in Southern California. And to this day, it's one of the things I'm most proud of that I've ever worked on. And 9 months after we finished that strategy and handed it off, I got an invitation in the mail inviting me to the thing they had spent their money on instead of what I had designed. It was a supersized model of the human colon that they were using to travel the country, and you could walk through the colon to learn about your colon and what happens to your food when it goes through your colon. And that's what they decided to spend their money on instead of this beautiful program that I had spent all this time designing. And so I share this story with you because I think the philanthropy world is full of some of the most generous and well-meaning people I have ever met who have the power to do so much good, and often they do. And I believe that even the makers of that supersized human colon really mean well. But meaning well and doing good are not always the same thing. And that tension is what I wanted to explore in this book through Lucia's story and the lens of fiction. I had so much fun writing it, and I hope you will enjoy it. I wanted to finish off by saying the world feels very heavy right now. I am overseas, but emotionally I still feel very connected to everything that's happening here. I wrote this book as an escape. It is fun, it is funny, it is light with some serious undertones. It takes you to Buckingham Palace and the Ascot horse races. Colin Firth is in it, he makes a guest appearance. There's a private island where there's a conference full of billionaires that bring their own private chefs, but there's also a center for immigrants and refugees in North London who are fundraising desperately to keep the roof over their heads. I like to think of this book as the Devil Wears Prada treatment for the philanthropy world. I hope you take it to the beach. It has a little kick to it, but it pairs well with a spicy margarita. And, I started writing later in my life as well. I've always loved books. Growing up, I loved The Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley Twins. I used to go to the West Kendall Branch Library. Anybody at 305 in here? No? A lot of people from California. All right, fine. And I used to go to the library and read these books, and I loved them, but those books never felt like they represented me, my story, or my background. And so when I started writing, I wanted to write stories where I could see myself in the pages. Women who were grown-ups. I love stories. I love transporting stories. I like people that fall apart sometimes, even though they kind of have their shit together. And I wanted diverse Latina heroines because it can be hard to find them. We are multitudes, as you said. So this is my window on the world. As a philanthropy advisor, a mother, an immigrant, the daughter of immigrants, the granddaughter of immigrants, and the great-granddaughter of immigrants. The book is not out until August 5th, but you're all gonna get a copy today. I would love your support in pre-ordering. Tell your book club. I'm going on an 8-city US book tour this fall. I will stop by and say hello wherever you are. It's hard out there for an author, so would love your help. And I hope that you can find something to relate to and enjoy in Lucia's story. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we want to give a final round of applause to all of our speakers and authors and your. And you also have some homework, because even though you will receive a signed copy, I heard you loud and clear, Alicia. So if you have an opportunity to take a selfie, or when you post your picture with any of the authors, go ahead and put in a link to your website, or a link to the Audible, or a link to the Amazon. I'm sure you're okay with that. Yes, I'm not in trouble for doing that, so that we can all apoyar and pass the information forward so that others can also apoyar an ecosystem of Latino authors. So thank you all for your time. And now we're going to step in the back. Jackie? Yes.
Everybody, if you would not mind sitting tight for just 1 minute, we're going to usher our authors over to their tables. So please remain seated. You guys can get moving now. You can take them over. I got group photo. Oh, okay. 1 second. I want you to keep people in the room and let them get out. We're just gonna get them seated, and then you'll all be able to line up. It is first come, first serve, and 1 book per person, but we do have a lot of copies. They are all prepaid by the conference. Except our friend Jessie. So give us please just 1 minute and let us take them through. I need them to